Probably so that he could keep his position and be like, hey everyone, I'm promoting diversity! In a previous video, I talked about how I used to be an indie author, or at least tried for it. You see these three books over here? I wrote them. They're available on Amazon. But I'm not going to show them here and now. Because today I want to talk about this article. What Happened to the Best-Selling Young White Man by Miles Bryan and Noel King, which is basically a transcript from a podcast that was edited for clarity that I'm going to read through, give my take on it as someone who has made attempts at getting into being an indie author and doing the whole and trying to get featured on Bookstagram. I'm going to be completely honest. The one over here, Foresight, I kind of went with a female protagonist, not just because ChatGPT happened to suggest it. I thought, hmm, maybe I could try appealing to what seems like a majority of female readers based on all the book review and author accounts on Instagram. I swear I could not find a single male author or reviewer. But rather than throw myself a pity party, I decided to instead put my resources and time into doing this channel because I recently listened to a bit from Tim Pool where he talked about how what you were doing as a teenager is training you for what you're doing as an adult. He said something about how someone who just hung out with friends when they were a teenager should run a bar because that's kind of, I guess, the thing to do for that, for what you want to do. Me personally, I did spend a lot of time playing video games, not hanging out with my friends as much as I probably should have. I spent my teen years making videos, and that's why I'm here now. So I tried the writing thing. I still enjoyed doing it because I don't have to deal with the hassle of getting a production together for a movie. That's what I discovered at 24 when I started writing the first one up there, The Legend of Hyde. I'm not even going to try pointing to it at this point with my fingers because I know I'm going to get it wrong. But enough about that. Not enough about me. Let's get into the article. I forgot to say this is from Vox. Every generation has a small group of young fiction writers who make it. They top bestseller lists, win prizes, and become household names. And for decades, well, nearly every decade, they have all been straight, white men. Philip Roth, Norman Mailer, John Updike, Jonathan Franzen, Jonathan Safran Foer. You get the picture. I'd like to throw Rick Riordan in there too. I'm a fan of the Percy Jackson books. But in the last decade or so, that's changed. The up-and-coming writers capturing buzz and dominating critics' lists have largely been women. Think Sally Rooney or Emma Klein or Otessa Moshfegh. And when men do break through, they usually aren't young, straight, or white. It's worth pointing out that while women now publish books more than men are still publishing more books now than they ever have before. That's the first I've heard of that. It's probably because it's a lot easier to do now compared to 20 years ago. Like 20 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for me to be able to get not one, not two, but three books for sale on Amazon. But the relative decline of the men in letters has led to searching discussions. First murmured, but now increasingly debated in places like the New York Times and the Guardian. Why does the decline of the young, white, male writer matter? And what do we lose, if anything, with this shift? We've seen a lot of great work being done to account for perspectives that were left out of literature for a long time. Ross Barkan, a journalist and novelist, told Today, explained co host Noel King. But I also think it's important, for better or for worse, what the men of the 2020s are up to. I just thought of a joke about how they're probably just scared of them turning into incels, but I don't want to be harsh on someone who's going through a rough time with romantic relationships and such, so I'm just going to say that they're probably realizing that the First Amendment applies to all. I'm just going to leave it at that. Oh, before I get back to the article, I also wanted to mention that I have seen a lot of the perspectives that had been left out for a while getting featured by Rick Riordan. Has this label for diverse authors. Okay, I have it. Give me just a second. Yeah, it's called Read Riordan. So you've got his own books, obviously. Magnus Chase. Oh, there's a no. That's just a collection. I thought. Never mind. Hey, you've got his books, including the new Percy Jackson ones that are got all the variants, the graphic novels. Oh, Rick Riordan Presents. This is the one I was talking about. So you've got Winston Chu versus the Whimsies, the Lords of Night, Sarah Boding's Guide to Vampire Hunting, Paola Paola Santiago and the Sanctuary of Shadows, The Last Fallen Moon. I think you get the idea. Yeah, from what I've been able to piece together from the Facebook page and from all of this, he's all about giving other people a voice, which I'm not against. I'm all for it. If Rick wants to highlight other authors, I have no problem with that. You know, he built up his brand recognition with the Percy Jackson books. He can do what he wants with that brand recognition. Anyway, getting back to the article, Barkin and King talked about how he feels young men have been shut out of literary fiction, which he thinks is lost, and his experience trying to get fiction published. His third novel, Glass Century, was released earlier this month. Below is a transcript of their conversation, edited for length and clarity. And they say it's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, which I considered bringing it up on the Apple Podcasts app, but I didn't want to have to make a new thing on the OBS. Plus, it was nearly half an hour. I think I'm better off just reading the portion they published on here. Yeah, let's just do that. We are talking to you today because you wrote an essay not long ago called From Misogyny to No Man's Land, The Vanishing Male in Contemporary Literature. What's your argument in that, Ross? My argument in that essay is that among young literary writers today, there's a lack of men. That doesn't mean there are no male novelists of prominence under the age of 40. That's the cutoff I use for young. But there are fewer of them than there were historically. Most of the prominent literary fiction writers today are women. I'm talking about a very specific type of fiction that is vying for awards or trying to vie for awards, trying to attain a certain level of prestige. I think trying to appeal to the book talk crowd might be a better description of it. So many of them, when from my time going through all of them, trying to find someone who I could send a review copy to, a lot of them were focused on romance novels and such. At that point, I was actually considering having ChatGPT generate romance novels to sell, then actually deciding to write it out, then deciding, no, I'd rather focus on ideas that I have that actually speak to me, that I actually want to. Like, I've been in writer's purgatory. I don't want to call it writer's block, but purgatory with The Legend of Hyde 3. That would be the sequel to these two over here. Foresight was a standalone idea I just couldn't not write. And now I have another one that I came up with based on what I'm seeing on YouTube, and maybe I can appeal to the YouTube crowd instead. I mean, the way that Mark Dice puts it is YouTube, you can present a full 3-course meal rather than little snippets of junk. I mean, look at how long my videos are, and then consider the average TikTok length. You do the math. You're 35 and you're a white man? Correct. I wonder about the kind of driving force for this essay, and whether you are the vanishing male writer of which you wrote. I think so, yeah. I think there's less of me for sure. I mean, there'd be an era where there were a lot of novelists like myself, Jewish or not Jewish, but certainly white men. I am inclined to find your argument very compelling. I was a teenager in the 90s, a young adult in the 2000s. That's when you read a lot of fiction, right? And I do remember David Foster Wallace, Jonathan Safran Foer, yeah, Jonathan Franzen, Jonathan Lethem. And so what you're saying actually really does track to me. The question I wonder about is the why. And let me ask you first to answer the why from your personal perspective. You're a novelist. You're 35 years old. You're a straight white guy. Do you feel like those identities are holding you back in some way? Not in the real world. In the real world, I have enormous privilege. But in the 2010s, the literary world was less interested in straight men. I think you have a general lack of the heterosexual male perspective in newer fiction. There's a long history of writers portraying toxic masculinity in rough male characters, and it feels like you see less of that today. I also think at the same time, young male writers, white and non white, were taking less of an interest in fiction. It's a chicken and egg challenge. Is it the publishing industry deciding this is no longer something we're going to push or take a real interest in? Or is it market forces as well? Honestly, I think that Amazon opening it up to pretty much anyone with a pulse being able to self publish might have played a role in it. I'm just going to be completely honest on that front. And from my perspective as a teenager and a young adult in the 2010s, okay, I wanted to be more of a movie guy than a TV guy. I didn't really think about what I wanted to do until it was too late to really do anything about it significantly or in an academic setting. So yeah, middle school again, I was a I was quite a Percy Jackson fan. Me and my friends actually tried to do an 8th grade English project where we're going to do a video of recreating the climactic final battle in The Last Olympian. Unfortunately, I did not have the nerve to assemble the people outside of our friend group that we needed. And I ended up doing a not as good version of it. It wasn't even a video project. I had to pivot to something else. But hey, the term after that, I actually came up with a pretty good thing for the book I Am Number Four. For those of you who haven't read it, it's about a alien on who's hiding on Earth. Comes from a very human appearing race of aliens. They're running from other aliens. He moves to another small town in America. In the book, he has this chest of various relics from the home planet that are also part of his legacies, his inheritance. I made my own version of that chest with items that were school appropriate. Like, for example, I took a tennis ball, wrapped it in paper, and then used markers to make it look like a little model Earth because in the book, number four, Sapon, Guardian, Henri, slipped in a model of the universe that could be projected out from it, something like that. But yeah, I had my interest in fiction, making my own fiction in high school when I made my short film series that was the genesis for The Legend of Hyde. But instead of writing, I wanted to make something visual. And so I made the short films using the fact that I could check out equipment from my high school's media lab. And I assembled people to make those short films. Sophomore year, I worked on the first one. I did parts 2 and 3 in junior year, and then part 4 in senior year. Yeah, I'd say my real problem with not getting it any further is that I didn't have the nerve to do what I would need to. Like, I've heard you gotta move out to Los Angeles for trying to get into Hollywood. And let's just say I'm, to this day, still reluctant to move. So, yeah, there's that. That's why another reason I pivoted to books, so I wouldn't have to move. On top of the fact that I could make whatever I wanted, I didn't I wouldn't have to compromise with anyone on the vision for it. Partially just so I could depict alcohol in a negative light at every chance, like in Foresight over there. Uh, the first chapter, and I'm gonna spoil my own book here. She dies in a drunk driving accident because she's driving drunk, and that's when she is reborn with all her memories in 1994, having died in 2024. Anyway, getting back to the article. So some of it is internal. Maybe there are fewer white men who want to be great novelists, but maybe publishers are saying, hey, we're just less interested in the perspectives of straight white men. When you approached publishers with your novel Glass Century, did you hear that? I think you hear it behind the scenes. You're never told to your face. I'm not complaining. I don't consider myself a victim. I've had a successful career. I'm very happy with it. Yeah, as I've said in previous videos, being a victim is not empowering. Like me, I do my best to avoid playing the victim here. As for why he has never been told to his face, that that they don't want him because he's a quote straight white male. Um, if they put that into writing or had if he got some kind of evidence for it, he could probably sue them. That's why when companies that are hiring people find someone they don't want, they just claim that the position has already been filled. They have to be very careful what they say because if they say the wrong thing, person can turn around and sue them, especially if they leave a paper trail. Pro tip to any of you who are out there who are hiring managers, if someone asks you if they can get that in writing, make sure to put into writing whatever a lawyer tells you to put into writing. Filter it through a lawyer. I was about to say just write something very safe. Nope, consult a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. I do not know what I'm talking about here. I'm just some idiot on the internet. But what do you hear behind the scenes? To echo Joyce Carol Oates' sort of a notorious but not wrong tweet from several years ago, and I'm paraphrasing, agents and editors, at least in the 2010s and early 2020s, were just less interested in straight male fiction. I want to broaden it a little bit because you see, even among black, Hispanic, and Asian straight men, there are some, but they're less common. And certainly, the white male is now even less common, so I think publishers in general in that era were trying to diversify, which is fine. You had social justice politics, you had what they call woke, and in a way, woke worked because it broadened things out and brought in new voices. But there's also zero sum. Some come up, some go out. And so for me, it's observing that trend. I'm starting to wonder if that's why Rick Riordan made. What was the label named again? How I forgot. Rick Riordan Presents. Probably so that he could keep his position and be like, hey everyone, I'm promoting diversity! What do you think we lose when we lose the perspective of those young white men? It's a large part of the country. I think you have a lot going on with young men today. White and non white alike, straight men, they are falling behind academically. They're increasingly alienated. They're increasingly angry. They are increasingly online. And fiction, in my view, is not grappling with all of that. That is exactly why the book I decided to shift my focus to, that I'm working on, does kind of play into the online part of it. All I'm gonna say is it's a untitled incel thriller in the vein of Joker and Wicked. I don't want to say too much more than that. I agree with you, but I did actually see that in one book in the last year, Rejection by Tony Tula Thimut. There were characters who were highly online. The most acclaimed story was about an incel. That book was incredibly powerful. It got praised, right? What do you think about that? Is this going to be adolescence all over again, except in book form? Also, it looks like Tony Tulathamut might have beat me to it. If it turns out that he also had family courts as part of the story, I don't know. I'll have I'll start wondering if I'm accidentally plagiarizing it. Though I'll definitely be sure to inject my voice into the one I'm writing. He's a fantastic writer. I'll start there. He's got a great prose stylist. There's a short story I love about a young Asian man who is having these very lurid sexual fantasies about dominating other men. Fantastically written. He's sort of the Roth of our era in terms of his ability to make a sentence really sizzle. But this is the caveat that people seem to be afraid to point out. It's not a straight male fantasy. Could Tony have written a straight male fantasy of wanting to subdue a woman the way that character wants to subdue men? Tony himself is straight. It was an interesting choice there to inhabit a gay character. Nothing wrong with that. Writers should write about whatever sexuality. I don't believe in limiting anyone in that way. Like how I decided to write a female protagonist for Foresight, but I thought it was a choice, right? Because straight male lust is very disconcerting. It's not easy to write about. What do men think about? The modern novel is not addressing that enough. The nasty, nasty men. The men who are not. Maybe they're good at heart, but they have a lot of bad thoughts. And they take bad actions. You don't see that much in fiction today, I would argue. Hey, thanks for the advice for my book. Although I said earlier that mine is in the vein of Wicked and Joker, that's because I want it to really be about how society labels men with the labels like incel without actually thinking about the long-term effects. I'm going to leave it there before I spoil a book I haven't even actually written properly. I've outlined it, but I think it's best we get back to the article. Let me ask you about an argument that I think people might have in response to what you've said, including many women. If you look at the stats going back to the year 1800, women made up about 5% of published authors. It's 10% through about the 1900s, and then in 2015, women surpassed men. More women are publishing books than men. Although both genders are still publishing a lot of books, it should be said. Are you at all sympathetic to the argument that you guys had your turn for centuries, the attention, the prizes, the accolades, so we're just leveling out the playing field out? Before I read his answer, I want to say this is exactly what Dickinson is all about, with Emily Dickinson's father having been opposed to women being published. If you have Apple TV Plus, go watch Dickinson. It's actually a really good show. Now for his answer. Yeah, I'm sympathetic for sure. I think that it's reasonable to believe that. That's an honest argument. The problem is you'll hear from people who say that this isn't happening, and I find that very tiring. I think the honest thing to say is that it's time to rebalance the scales or turn the tables. But there are winners and losers, right? Women were losing. Now men are losing. I will say there's no solace offered to the 26-year-old male who must pay for the sins of the past, right? The young male writer who can't sit at home and think, well, golly, it was good Norman Mailer and John Updike had such a great run. So, yes, I think one can rebalance, one can seek balance, one can ensure that groups of people who are discriminated against have their time as they should. My point merely is that you can't then pretend that there aren't those who aren't getting what they want. Honestly, I'm starting to wonder if maybe publishers should just focus on the content of the story and then go from there. Meritocracy. There's always the self publish option. I've done it. You can literally see the results right behind me. And that's the end of it. So, yeah, interesting article. I wanted to talk about it because, again, I've talked about how I tried being an indie author, but I am not going to lie. I felt a little discouraged by the fact that literally every potential reviewer I could find on Instagram were women. Not that I have a problem with that, but I am just saying it makes it harder to write for. I do now understand how it can be a little discouraging to have one less thing in common. But you know what? Maybe I should, I don't know, go to an actual publisher and just see if I can get real published based on the merits of the story. You know what? I'm just going to leave it here for the video. You let me know in the comments down below what you think about all of this, whether you think it's just because Whether this is happening just because the market's now a free-for-all with self-publishing and all, or you think that there is a institutional push one way or another, and now we are where we are. Me personally, I'm inclined to say that it's just because the market's a free-for-all now, thanks to self-publishing. I mean, again, I have self-published 3 books over there, so there's that. I'm sure that the male book reviewers exist. I think I found a couple on YouTube, but I was more focused on Instagram back in August and September, and I was trying to get reviews out there. Give this video a like, subscribe for daily videos, and I'll see you soon.